Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Anderson, Dr. Gary, Dr. Anderson in particular here, I just wanted to address one thing here to start with. I know this has been mentioned again, but I just want to reiterate this. You emailed Dr. Fauci prior to the February 1st call, and you said, quote, "The unusual features of the virus make up a really small part of the genome," end quote. And then you went on to say, "After discussions earlier today, Eddie, Bob, Mike, and myself all find the genome inconsistent with expectations from evolutionary theory." Later on in the phone call that followed, Dr. Farzan said, "So I think it becomes a question of how do you put all this together, whether you believe this is a series of coincidences, what you know of the lab in Wuhan, how much could be in nature, accidental release, or nature event. I am 70-30. Dr. Gary, you stated, I really can't think of a plausible natural scenario where you get from the bat virus to one very similar to it, to where you insert exactly 4 amino acids, 12 nucleotides, that all have to be added at the exact same time to gain this function. I just can't figure out how this gets accomplished in nature. It's stunning," you said. All right. Nevertheless, 3 days later, and I cleared this up in the hearing, so thank you. I thought this was the initial release of proximal origins, but it wasn't. But nevertheless, 4 days later, I have this email here, and it's been mentioned already by one of my colleagues here, but I just want to reiterate it again. This is an email on February the 4th that was initiated, at least what I have here, by Dr. Holmes, who I wish was here so he could answer a couple of questions I have about this email. But it says, it's addressed to Jeremy Farrar, and it says, "Here is a summary so far. Will be edited further. It's fundamental science and completely neutral as written. Did not mention other anomalies, as this will make us look like loons." I have no idea what that means. I'd love to find out, but he's not here to answer that question. It was replied to by Dr. Farrar, who also CC'd Dr. Fauci and Dr. Collins, and said, "Please treat in confidence a very rough first draft from Eddie and the team. They will send an edited, cleaner version later." Dr. Francis Collins replied, "Very thoughtful analysis," and then Dr. Jeremy Farrar replied with something which I don't know what it is, because the vast majority of every bit of his response is redacted out, so I don't know exactly what that was. But my question was, you've cleared up that this was not the initial draft of proximal origins, that this was a response email or a follow-up draft report, or whatever you want to call it, in response to the phone call that took place on February the 1st. My question for both of you is, at that particular point, when this information, this draft summary was forwarded to Dr. Collins and Dr. Fauci, referencing the phone call that you'd had days earlier, were your conclusions changed? Had your hypothesis changed at that particular point?
I can take that. I think, let me just go back to the original email, because there's other sentences in that email that I think is important to. First of all, I say we have a good team lined up to look at very critically at this, so we should know much more at the end of the weekend. I also say, but we have to look at this much more closely, and there are still further analyses to be done, so those opinions could change. When you're looking at our February 4 summary, which is the one that you're referring to here, our main conclusion is that we believe deliberate engineering can be ruled out with a high degree of confidence. However, referring to both lab leaks, specifically the tissue culture hypothesis that we describe in proximal origin, our conclusion at the time of February 4th is that current data are consistent with all three. It is currently impossible to prove or disprove either.
Okay, Dr. Gary, what about you? Because you specifically said, I mean, Dr. Anderson says he doesn't believe it was engineered, but he said he hadn't ruled out a lab leak in that particular thing. Dr. Gary, you specifically said that, you find it completely stunning and implausible that this, that you insert 4 amino acids and 12 nucleotides, all that have to be exact same time to gain this function. That sounds like engineering to me.
Well, again, Representative Jackson, I think I started to or tried to address this before. That was a single email out of a lot of communications that I was having with people like Dr. Anderson and others. And in that particular email, I was, raising my concern about this one.
Let me ask this real quick. You reiterated, you did explain that. Let me just ask you guys real quick. So you're telling me that, and this was the actual first publication of proximal origin was published on February 16, 2020. It was posted on the website Virological. So from February 1st to February 16th, are you telling me that you gathered all of this you gathered all of this additional information, because we know what your initial hypothesis was or your initial conclusions were to start with before. You gathered every bit of this new additional information, which we don't know exactly what it was or where it came from. You completely changed your hypothesis. You collaborated with your co-authors, and you wrote the proximal origins paper all in that period of time. I just want to know, my time's up, but I just want you to know that sounds completely ridiculous to the American people, and it's completely in step with what a lot of people think is going on here, is that Dr. Anthony Fauci and Francis Collin realized that they had been implicated in the production or in the creation of this virus, and they were doing everything they could, including getting both of you to come on board as tools or vehicles to undermine that theory. Thank you. My time is up.